This is a time of change. I'm fed up. I think that most of the people in the 2nd District and in this nation are fed up. From my perspective, I'm running as a Green Party candidate, not only because I've been a member of the Green Party for 15 years, but certainly because I feel the Democratic and Republican parties are interchangeable parts in a system that has been designed and devised by corporate America and the wealthy elite of this country, so that whether a Republican or a Democrat is elected to a particular seat or post, the policies stay the same. And I think that most people instinctively feel that that's the case, that the differences between the Democratic and Republican parties have become very, very minor in the last 15 or 20 years in particular. There's been a convergence of both parties towards a middle ground, and certainly both tripped over one another to sign FISA, to sign the Patriot Act. They continue to fund the war in Iraq, despite the Democrats recently gaining seats in Congress, promising the people of the United States that they would get us out of the war in Iraq. I'm about ending the war in Iraq in 10 months or less. I will not vote for any funding for the war. The Green Party and I are about some type of exercise where President Bush and President Cheney have to answer questions posed to them by Congress and by the people of the United States thereby about what they knew about so-called weapons of mass destruction and what consent for the war was manufactured by the executive office. It doesn't have to be a formal impeachment exercise, but some type of formal questioning even after their administration ends in January. We also have to look at our agricultural system. This is something that my two major party competitors are not going to talk about and wouldn't be brought up unless I were in the debate process here in New London, and that is we have a dysfunctional agricultural system. It is based on repeated subsidies for cheap corn. That's one reason that we have inexpensive high fructose corn syrup that's in just about everything, certainly all prepared foods. And as a consequence, the children in this country have obesity and diabetes problems, which are rampant across the nation. Also, corn, 65%, there's a lot of talk about ethanol in corn, and ethanol doesn't work because corn is a nitrogen glut. We're dumping all kinds of petrochemicals and have been since the 1960s on continued crops of corn. That creates a lot of pollution. It doesn't work in terms of ethanol, particularly ethanol that is coming from corn grown in the middle part of the country. As a consequence, we have to grow it locally. It can work locally and from other sources other than corn. In Brazil, they are entirely using ethanol for their automobiles because of sugarcane. That's where they get ethanol. That can only work in the southern states. But here, cattails, cellulosic ethanol can be produced at a local level, not using petrochemicals, which reduces the net benefit from the ethanol, and it will help local farmers and produce ethanol at a local level so that we're not trucking it 1,500 miles to get here, which again is counterproductive in terms of energy conservation. The war in Iraq, I feel we should pull out. I feel we should be pulling our bases back. We've got over 700 bases in over 130 foreign countries. If I'm elected to Congress, I will fight for reductions, major reductions in the military, not only to get us out of Iraq. All that money that we're spending in Iraq to this point in time, and it's projected that if we stop the war tomorrow, it's going to cost us between $3.5 trillion and $4 trillion, so-called indirect costs, to care for our wounded over the next several decades in terms of impacts in Social Security and so on that our wounded are going to bring. We have 40% of our people coming back, if not with physical wounds, serious physical wounds, with emotional wounds. We have to deal with that. That's going to cost us $3.5 to $4 trillion. That's borrowed money from foreign sources if we stop the war tomorrow. We spend between, estimates are $750 billion to $1 trillion just on baseline military. Much of that goes to support those over 700 bases in foreign countries in over 130 countries. We can reduce that because that expenditure is 50% of what the entire world spends on military. 25% of what the entire world spends is spent by our allies. So our so-called enemies are spending, and I say so-called enemies, are spending maximum 25%, and I think we all know that the remaining non-allied countries are not necessarily the enemies of the United States. So we can cut back by 25% in our military, start closing some of these bases in foreign countries which are there to protect corporate interests. They're not there to protect you or me. They're not there to protect the people of the 2nd District. They're there to protect corporate interests. It has been estimated by environmental scientists that the amount of energy that goes into deconning a facility such as Millstone, burying these materials out west in caverns, mines, wherever it might be, meets or exceeds the amount of energy that's actually produced by the power plant during its 30 to 40-year life expectancy. The other consideration is people don't talk about uranium. That's selling right now for $64 a pound, sources in Uganda, Tanzania, primarily in Africa. It's been estimated again that just as we've got maybe 35 years of oil resources left globally, we've got about 35 or 40 years of uranium left. Now there's potential for breeder reactors where uranium is turned into plutonium, and those are possibilities technologically. But it is a short-term answer to build more nuclear plants. It is not only not a long-term solution, it is a long-term problem. So I'm in favor of renovating the existing plants. I'm not in favor of building new plants. Now, we have to, as you said, have a segue. We can't just sustain ourselves with solar energy, wind power, tidal energy, whatever it might be. I agree with T. Boone Pickens that natural gas may be the best solution. It is a much, much less of a pollutant than gasoline. We have the technology already in our automobiles to run on natural gas. Much of the state of Connecticut fleet, cars that I used performing inspections while working for DEP, run on either gasoline or natural gas. The problem is we have no natural gas filling stations in the state of Connecticut. But the technology is there, whether it's General Motors, Ford, whomever the manufacturer might be. It's already there. So natural gas is the segue. We need to invest now, as if there is no other potential source of energy, in solar and wind power. The T. Boone Pickens plan to get us off of foreign oil within the decade, I think, is very reasonable. I've looked at it very closely. I've signed on to it. We have to keep in mind that oil is finite. I'm opposed to drilling offshore. I'm opposed to drilling in the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge. You've all heard the comparisons about the tire gauge and inflating your tires properly. But very simply, if we can get one more mile per gallon efficiency, fuel efficiency, out of our automobiles, we will save in a year what is at the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge. It's amazing how people don't seem to object to $700 billion, $800 billion to bail out Wall Street, but they don't want to spend that type of money to start single-payer universal health care or repair our infrastructure. I am opposed to corporate welfare and these bailouts, and I think we need to look very closely at two things. First of all, the unlimited power that apparently is being given to Mr. Paulson. If in fact this bailout comes to fruition. Number one, we need to look at the Federal Reserve, number two, and the fact that we have no legal input, no transparency in terms of the operation of the Federal Reserve. It is its own entity, much like the World Bank, separate from government, separate from democracy and input or consideration by the people at large. The bailout is racketeering. What they are saying in Wall Street is, you better bail us out or people won't be able to buy a car with a car loan. People won't be able to use their Chase credit card. And it is after wealthy CEOs, and we all know about their multi-million-dollar salaries, have basically looted Wall Street, and many of these corporations have been part of the practice as well, either due to poor management or due to deliberate fraud. We need to save mortgages. We need to save savings people that have certificates of deposit that are supposed to be safe savings, bank accounts, everything else in terms of life savings. How do we do that? Well, I think we need to go back to what the government did during the Great Depression, during FDR's years, and not so much hand over hundreds of billions of dollars to the current corporations and lending institutions on Wall Street that got us into this problem. I think the government needs to take over some of these things themselves and run them themselves. It's not making a profit. Ultimately, we know that the taxpayers won't be paying for this over a couple of generations, which is what's going to happen. Our kids and grandkids will end up paying for the $1 trillion to bail them out. We know where the money will be going. It won't be going to the wealthy investors, while the middle class and the people that have their life savings or mortgages tied up in all these investments are losing out. And the government people, the federal employees, won't be getting multi-million-dollar salaries. It will pay for itself ultimately. I think that the government can renegotiate mortgage rates to get them down to reasonable non-predatory rates and protect people's savings. Those, in my view, are the two important things. If businesses fail, so be it. That's natural selection. And I think that some of these businesses have to fail in order for people not to invest capital in what are basically poor investments.